Before I do anything else this morning, I did want to make sure I reached out and acknowledged Chris Eichenlaub. Many of you may have known Chris. He was the Safety Services Director in Elyria, was killed in a car accident on Sunday, and so a lot of our colleagues and friends from Elyria aren't with us this morning because they're, I believe, attending services this morning. So our thoughts and prayers go out to Chris's family and our friends from Elyria. So before I do anything else beyond that as well, I wanted to begin with a huge thank you. A thank you all for participating in the session this morning, and it's extraordinarily gratifying to see the large number of people that are here and the diversity of people we have here in terms of our geography and the backgrounds in such that we come from, whether it be in safety services, GIS, elected officials, and so forth. It really was what we were hoping to achieve when we conceived of the idea for this session, and it's good to see it come about. But I really want to thank you for something more than showing up at a meeting. I want to thank you for the leadership that you're providing in your communities and, frankly, in the region in conceiving of new ways of doing business. It really is fundamental to our future, as we'll talk about in a moment, but it's not easy to do, and it's asking you and you're asking your colleagues to do things that are out of the ordinary, perhaps even outside of your comfort zones. And so it's terrific to have your leadership here in this region. And I suspect we all are coming at this for a lot of different and perhaps personal reasons. For some of you, it may be kind of the realization of your own philosophies and ideals about what good government should be. For others of you, maybe it was you heard the quality of the donuts, or that you were just curious as to what's going on. And I suspect a number of you may even be here out of necessity, because of the fiscal crises that you're facing in your neighborhoods and your communities and counties. But whatever the motivation, you are here. Now, we at the Fund are coming to this conversation from the perspective of our collective economic health. So the Fund for Our Economic Future is a collaboration of the philanthropic community working across the counties of Northeast Ohio, and we're dedicated to the long-term economic health of the region. And we do that by working with civic and community leaders to develop new industries, to ensure that we have a workforce that's prepared for the jobs that are being created, to advance issues of economic inclusion in our growth. But we are also know that how government is organized and works matters a great deal to our economic health. And so really there's three messages I guess I have by way of introduction to this session. Number one, what you are doing and this issues in front of us are really, really important. Number two is success is going to be a series of cumulative actions as opposed to a grand gesture that we can achieve in some way that may be more highly visible to the public. And thirdly, that the work that we're doing is really, really difficult. And we'd like to acknowledge that it's really difficult. In fact, the reason that we're enthusiastic about the creation of this efficient Gov network is we'd like to do our part in helping you in this effort because we know that there are many challenges that we face. So I mentioned I'm with the Fund for Our Economic Future, and that government effectiveness is one of the issues that defines our work. And when we got started, we said we wanted to focus in on the things that matter. And so to determine what things matter to our economic future, we did two things. One is we got all the smart guys and gals, the economists of the region, to come together and say, over the long haul, what matters to the economic vibrancy of a community? And then second was we went out and we asked some 21,000 citizens from across the region about what was important to them. And in coming back to us on that, both the economists and the publics said that government efficiency is vitally important to our economic future. And so that is why this has risen up to being such a priority for us and, frankly, for the citizens of Northeast Ohio. And I suppose it's not surprising. I mean, we often talk about the importance of manufacturing in Northeast Ohio. We talk about the importance of healthcare. But as an industry, local government is about the same size. So we are a $20 billion industry in this room today. And so it's not surprising that how productive and efficient and effective we are as a $20 billion industry, about 10% of our economy, is really linked to our economic fortunes. And we also know, though, that currently the system that we have is financially unsustainable. There's great work going on in each of our communities to be productive and efficient, but collectively, as it all comes together, it's not adding up for us. Presently, we have government spending increasing at a rate about 3 to 4 times the rate of our economic growth. And that's because of the effects of the systems costs that we have as opposed to what's happening in individual community. So before I was in the world of philanthropy, I spent 20 years in business as a management consultant. And we spent a lot of time with different companies working on their issues of efficiency. And in particular, I spent time in the banking industry, which I must have done a lot of good given the state of the banking industry. But often we would work on these issues of profitability. And I can recall one project in the state of Pennsylvania where we were working with individual bank branches to try to improve their efficiency. And we'd worked for maybe a year or two. And we could eke out 2 to 3% productivity gains a year by working with the individual units. But it was when we worked with the system overall and we could think of constellations of branches or how branches purchase services together and things of that sort that we are able to find 12, 13, 14, and 15% efficiencies while improving quality. And I think the analogy is one that may be apt here. One of the things I want to make clear, though, is it's easier in business than it is in government. Right? It's easier in business than it is in government. I've spent 20 years in one and 10 years at the other, and I can say that, I think, pretty certainly. And it's easier in business because you have a CEO who can say, this is where we're going and this is where we're going to do it, and you've got shareholders who only care about one thing. Your job is more difficult, right? You don't have a single CEO who says, across these multiple geographies, here's how we optimize the system, and what optimizing the system is and means will vary by stakeholder group and so forth. So it is more challenging, but it is no less important in the work that we do. And the reality is we really don't have any choice. We need to find these sorts of systems breakthroughs. Now, like many of you, you may be upset by the political polarization that we see in society that seems to be increasing. Now, one of the things, at least as I look out at these issues of the government efficiency, it feels to me that it should know no political stripe. Right? For wherever you land on the spectrum and whatever your politics, this is a good thing. If your highest priority is lowering tax burdens, well, this helps us do that. If your highest priority is educating our young people or freeing up dollars that can be used for innovation in the next generation of jobs, this should help us do that as well by finding these efficiencies. And frankly, it is necessary just in order to keep the lights on. So ultimately, this is one of the defining issues of our day, and the question will be, will we tackle it? You're the group that seems to be willing to take it on as opposed to just kicking the can down the road for the next generations of leaders, because this issue will be with us. So then the question is, how come this hasn't captured more of the imagination of the public? And it strikes me that's because it isn't like one grand gesture. You know, we think about something like a medical mart or a bio-innovation institute or something of that sort, and it's big and it's visible and it's something we can rally around, where the work we're talking about here will collectively unleash tens, if not hundreds of millions of dollars, but it's no one thing, and therefore it's perhaps less sexy in the minds of the public. but I want to assure that it is no less important, and the effects that we'll be having will be cumulative. But then finally, I think the issue is that it's hard work as well. And back in my consulting days, we used to talk about change management, and we would talk about will and skill, and to what degree was a company and its management team, did they have the will to change? Did they have conviction that change was important? And did they have the courage to go do it? And to what degree was the change management task about skill? To what degree were the individual units within the company capable of making the change? And to what degree was the system of the company aligned in order to do that? So did you have will or skill? And you'd spend your time thinking about where is the right way to act in order to influence those levers. And if you think about our own experience in Northeast Ohio, one of our great successes of the last several years has been in the biomedical industry, where we're enjoying great growth. A decade ago, that wasn't so. And if you think about what was going on at the time, we really had an issue of will as opposed to skill. We knew we had these extraordinary assets, but we didn't have a conviction of a community to go aggressively at developing those assets or the courage to move forward. And so there was a big movement made in order to muster the will to go do that, and then it happened very rapidly because we had all those skills. Or if you take an area like workforce development right now, the question is it will and skill? And yes, we have some issues of will. How much do we really, really believe that worker retraining and educational attainment are important? And we know that we have all sorts of individual elements of skill in workforce. We have great community colleges. We have some innovative workforce investment boards and so forth. But we have an issue of skill as it relates to the alignment of the system. And so we don't have employers working well enough with the community colleges and the WIBs and others, and so we're short of where we need to be. And so therefore the interventions need to be different. So as we think about the challenge then of government collaboration and efficiency, the issue becomes, is it an issue of will, conviction and courage, or is it an issue of skill? Well, as we wandered at the fund into this a few years ago, we were struck by the fact that maybe we needed to start with will. And so you may remember the Efficient Gov Now program, which was kind of a P.T. Barnum effort to raise some visibility in a fun way about the idea that there is potential everywhere in terms of government collaboration, and we involved the public in voting for ideas and so forth. And the idea was to raise the visibility so that those of you who were innovators would be lifted up as champions, and the public would see that that was possible, and we would have increasing conviction and courage to do something. We believe now that we have the will and that the task in front of us is around skill, and that's what's leading to this idea of the Efficient Gov Network. We know that we have capable people here, but we also know that this is a difficult task, and so how can we learn from each other? And so we at the fund are ready and willing to do our part to support you, and the idea that we have in working and talking with many of you is that can we come together as a group and learn from each other and hopefully use that as the springboard in order to achieve some change. And so this conference is really a kickoff to that. I hope you also are aware now we have an online capability as well. You may have heard of the Civic Commons, and in fact Dan Moulthrop from the Civic Commons will be moderating a panel in just a moment here, in which we have a set of online resources that you can find at theciviccommons.com/EGN. And on there, there's a chance to have dialogue with each other about issues. We're featuring stories. There's already 2 short podcasts talking with mayors and public policy leaders about their efforts. And so we're keen that. But we are here at the fund. This is really the last you'll hear from us today because we're here to listen as to what it is you need in order to do your job. And so our hopes and expectations for today is, A, that you'll learn from each other and the practical experiences that we have so that we can increase our collective skills. Second, that we may even lay the foundation for doing a few deals. I'm guessing there's a lot of people in this room that you don't know, and perhaps there's a deal to be done out there. And third is that we figure out what it is you really need in order to perform and sustain the work going forward, and you can help us with that. And then finally, I hope you'll join the Efficient Gov Network, which is up and going, and in fact, we'll talk about it more later today, but the next meeting of the Efficient Gov Network will take place on November 10th at 9 a.m. in the Richfield Town Hall. So that's the hope, that's the expectation. The way today is structured is it's meant to be a practitioners' exchange. We're going to begin this morning with a plenary panel about, well, what and why a network. But then the balance of the day is really organized around practical experiences in different areas, and we hope you'll ask the hard questions about what's working, what's not working, and what may be relevant to your own community. So with that, I would now like to invite our panelists as well as Dan Moulthrop forward to the stage. I mentioned that Civic Commons, this community engagement platform, has been working with the Efficient Gov Network. Dan is the curator of conversation of the Civic Commons, and probably known to many of you as a voice of radio prior to working at the Civic Commons, and has been active in the community, and he is going to lead the discussion of our panelists about the Efficient Gov Network. Thank you. Dan?
Thank you. Can everybody hear me? Everything's on? You guys, if you brought water, I thank you. If you didn't, then, oh no, you did. That's great. Any order you like, as long as somebody takes a seat next to me, and you guys can all mic yourselves, I think. I'm hoping you've done this before. Just pin it to your lapel, and it should be fine. So when Efficient Gov Now launched, however many years ago it was, and I was hosting the Sound of Ideas, a lot of people were scratching their heads like, what is this thing? And we did that year and the following year, and some of you may have participated in this program, we did a kind of a... well, when I first heard about Efficient Gov Now, I kidded with Chris Thompson that it was government efficiency like Dancing with the Stars, like government efficiency with the stars, a competition. And he said, don't say that. Don't say that in public. So I've just violated that rule. But what it did, and I think that outside of government, it may have been hard to see that it actually changed the conversation for the general public in a way that was very important. Because it suddenly became, just turning it into a kind of a game, not that it's very serious, government efficiency, but it gamed it up just enough to make it interesting and get, as you all know, some 15,000 people one year, 17,000 people the following year, to actually cast a vote and make a decision about the kind of government collaborations they would like to see. And if you had asked, if you had gone across Northeast Ohio before Efficient Gov Now and tried to find 17,000 people who cared about government efficiency who didn't work inside government, you would have been hard-pressed to do so. What we did when I was working at IdeaStream on the Sound of Ideas was have a program that first year and then another one the second year where we gave the 10 finalists 3 minutes on the air, or four minutes maybe. It's hard to, you think that's not a lot of time, but it actually does fill an hour for a 2-minute pitch and then 2 minutes of questions, and then we had a Simon Cowell and a Paul Abdul kind of evaluate them. But it was great fun, and it was, and so I've been following this for a while, and it's very exciting for me to be here now and to see how much traction it's gained over the years, and also for me to be working at the Civic Commons and to feel like we are making a difference and we are providing a place for all of you to come together, not only in this room, but also online in an ongoing fashion to continue these sorts of conversations and to help one another learn. As Brad said, I mean, the way to do this is to learn from one another. We don't really need a lot of outside experts to come in and say, collaboration works. You should try it sometime, because we've lived it. So let me introduce who we have here today. Sitting next to me is John. You probably already know everybody who's up here, so I'm not going to say a whole lot about each of them. John Hoornbeek is the numbers guy. He's the guy he's the research guy. He's the guy who has been studying this since the beginning, working very closely with the fund, and he's the director of the Center for Public Administration and Public Policy at Kent State University. Tom Pascarella is administrator for the over there in the red tie. Tom Pascarella is administrator for the city of Talmadge, and he has a story to share with us that ends with $880,000 in savings. I'll just leave it at that. Dave Kaminski, who I hopped over, is a former journalist, a reformed journalist perhaps, retired journalist, And he also works, he has a considerable private sector experience now at the Canton Regional Chamber of Commerce as the Director of Education and Government Affairs there. And lastly, Ed Jerse, who is, we clarified this before. I was going to introduce him as the only man on the taxpayer dime with collaboration in his title, but it's not entirely true, as Chris Thompson and Hunter Morrison can attest. But he is the Director of Collaboration for Cuyahoga County. And you may, of course, I mean, he's been doing government reform for a long time, since the Reform Ohio Now days, and even before that. And now he's got a chance to really implement some serious reform. So we're going to, each of these men has about a 4 or 5 minute story to share. I'll ask some questions. About halfway through, we're going to open it up to questions from all of you. But our goal right now in the next hour is to set the table in a way, and also provide a picture of the landscape of collaboration. And we're going to start with Tom Pascarella. Tom, tell us the Talmadge story, and the one that ends with that $880,000 extra dollars in your piggy bank.
All right, fine, thank you. I taught at Hiram College for 30 years, and so I have to have notes, excuse me. But you make me feel at home because no one's sitting in the front of the classroom here. For those of you who aren't familiar with Talmadge, we're a community of about 17,000. Nothing terribly unusual about us in terms of population growth. It's been fairly level. We've had some slight bumps, but we probably look a lot like most of the communities that are here today. In 2008, we have a team that monitors monthly our financial situation. In 2008, we began to notice what was a bothersome trend, and that was our income tax receipts were declining. We have a 2% income tax, which brings in about $8 million a year, or it used to. And we began to see those income tax trending downward. After observing that for a couple of months, we decided we had a major structural issue that we were going to have to deal with, that this wasn't a little blimp in our revenue stream. And in fact, our income taxes fell from 2008 to 2009. They fell from almost 8.1 million down to 7.1 million. For some of you in bigger cities, that may not seem like a lot, but our entire general fund revenues in the neighborhood of 11. Our income taxes, you can see, being 7 to 8 million is the major driver of the general fund. And $1 million loss in receipts was devastating. Our first reaction was sort of an emergency response, and it was a good response. We cut our road program. We paved no streets, although we had authorization to do that. We cut capital, didn't buy cruisers. Dave Klein's here. He was the service director at the time. He's the mayor. He donated a new vehicle that he got as service director to the police department. It became a police cruiser. We did all sorts of one-time sorts of things. But we realized that those were all one-time things. You can't not pave the roads every year. You can't not buy police cruisers. And so we began to talk about what are some structural things that we ought to be doing. Fortunately, we had actually begun some discussions on some of these things, or had some ideas underway, which then we really pushed on. In particular, we consolidated our dispatch service. We had always had a full dispatch center. We consolidated that with the city of Stowe. We were a latecomer to RETA. I assume most of you are already in the Regional Income Tax Agency. We worked with Summit County. Russ Pry, if any of you know him, I don't know if Russ is here today or not, the county executive in Summit County was just an enormous breath of fresh air, and we worked with him abolishing our building department. All of our building functions are now handled through Summit County. And we became involved in information technology. I was just talking to our IT manager yesterday. Just our phone lines, our monthly bills were in the neighborhood of $10,000 a month. They're down to $5,000 a month, and we're moving forward on that. In fact, there was a panel after this morning's panel where You can ask all the technical questions you want because we'll have people there who can do that. This is something I've just kind of pushed and understood this much of this IT world. People just keep saying, it'll work, it's better, what have you. Those things, the dispatch consolidation, the building department elimination, the movement to RETA, and the IT efforts are saving us in the neighborhood of $880,000. Now, that's not a one-time savings, like we're not going to do the road program this year to save money. In fact, we're putting the road program back. That's a $880,000 every year type of savings. On top of that, we formed a joint economic development district with Brimfield Township, which is on the eastern border of the city. It's actually in Portage County. We're in Summit, so we had to cross the county line. This came out of a 10-year battle with Brimfield over a proposed annexation. We were not the best of friends. Things were very hostile. Their lawyers talked to our lawyers for 10 years. We were able to sit down with them and say, this is crazy. And we formed a joint economic development district. This year, it's bringing $340,000 to Talmadge. It's bringing that much to Brimfield. And as a township, that's a major part of their budget, a $340,000 addition. You have to let me look at my notes for a moment. Okay, well, where are we now? Well, we're really been kind of fortunate in some ways and not so fortunate in others. Our income tax is beginning to return. We're beginning to get growth. For 2 years, we watched our income tax just decline. It began to bottom out. The good news was that it was bottoming out. The bad news was it was leveling out, but at a very low level. We've actually begun to see increases in our income tax collections. We're not back to where we were in 2008, but they've been fairly healthy. In addition to that, we've had these savings that I talked about. We have the money from the JED. In general, things are looking up. In fact, we also did a number of reductions in budgets. I brought a sheet, and if more of you sat at the front, you could see the red. Those are savings. But I ran a sheet on what are we spending this year compared to 2008. Our finance director was kind enough to do this for me. And it's somewhat distorted because it's across funds and what have you. But this year, our expenditures will be approximately $3.6 million less than they were in 2008. I think the good thing about all this is that the citizens of Talmadge don't know that we did it. The services that they're getting are on the par or better than they were. In fact, we're to the point now where we're putting back what I consider somewhat not essential services, but desirable services. We're putting back concerts in the parks in the summer and things like that. Our general fund balance through all of this, has gone from $2.8 to $4 million. We've actually increased our general fund balance. I guess part of my story, and I'll shut up, is...
No, Tom, I was going to ask you, before you wrap up, could you give us the thumbnail of the combined dispatch story?
This actually began about 4 years ago. As Brad said, and I can recall teaching college and telling my students change isn't easy, but I had no idea what I was saying. This began about 4 years ago, and we tried to get 11 communities together in Summit County to do combined dispatch. And we attempted, well, we didn't attempt, we actually formed a council of governments and tried to get 11 communities to do it. And slowly, communities, for one reason or another, backed out and said, we just don't want to do this. We were looking at, how do we do interoperability or whatever. There's some people here from Stowe Dispatch that Ginger can probably tell you all about the technology. But we had a long history of trying to get this thing started. There were more impediments than you can imagine. We became a new political subdivision as a council of governments. There are questions of how could we borrow money since we had no existing financial history. The financial institutions weren't sure they wanted to borrow us or lend us money for millions of dollars worth of equipment when we'd been in existence for 3 months. The story is a long one. But eventually what we came to do was we moved our dispatch center to the city of Stowe. We entered a contract. People know how to enter contracts with their neighbors. We did that. Mogador did that. Randolph Township has done that. And so Stowe absorbed our dispatchers. We laid none of our dispatchers off when this transfer was done. We're able to enjoy a service where when someone picks up the phone and calls 911, they have no idea whether the phone call is being answered in Talmadge or Stowe. In fact, they may very well get an old Talmadge dispatcher that's now a Stowe dispatcher. This has not been seamless. This isn't always easy. Department heads don't like to do some of this stuff. It's a lot of hard work. But we've been able to successfully do that. It's been a tremendous savings to us. And as I said, our citizens really have no idea that it's done. The phone system that we're doing, the IT that we're doing. We went after services that we thought our citizens would either have no impact on the service they got or the service level they were getting would be improved. In some ways, it's a good and a bad. Mayor Klein's running for re-election this year. We've saved a lot of money, but nobody in the city knows it, you know. And so I keep telling Dave, you've got to let people know that you actually did this.
Well, if their taxes haven't gone up, then you can make that point, I suppose.
Right.
Tom, thank you very much. John Hoornbeek, Tom put us at sea level, more or less, a little higher, a few hundred feet higher. Take us up to 20,000 feet and help us understand where the Talmadge story fits into or is being replicated around the region.
Okay. Do people hear me okay? Good, the mic's working. I'm John Hoornbeek. I'm on the faculty of the College of Public Health at Kent State University. I also serve there as the director of the Center for Public Administration. And as a part of that responsibility, I've had the good fortune to work with a number of graduate students and colleagues over the last several years to try to understand what's happening in the world of public sector collaboration and performance improvement, if you might call it that. I think probably the best thing to point out here would be some of the good things that are happening and some of the challenges that we face in this area. And I'll point out, I guess, my perception on 4 good things that are happening and 2 challenges that we need to be thinking about. First, this room is filled. There are a lot of people right now thinking about public sector collaboration in this region. You're not alone. They're thinking about it in states throughout this country, and there's action being taken all over the nation in this regard, and there's much to learn from those efforts. An effort we've undertaken over the past few years identified about 250 distinct collaborative efforts in our region, many of which are now operational in one way or another. So there's a lot of energy and a lot of attention being paid to the issue of how do we make governments work more effectively and more collaboratively with one another. And I think Tom Pascarella's comments demonstrate that Talmadge has been a leader in that area as it has moved forward as well. There are many other examples of efforts to move forward going on. So that's kind of good news number 1 in a sense. I think the other thing I'd point out is that the collaborative spirit, the collaborative endeavor is occurring across many different policy sectors in the local government arena. We're seeing economic development efforts, public work efforts, IT efforts, public safety efforts, and so forth. This is not something that is a narrow discussion. It is one that is broad, that encompasses the full range of things that local governments do, the full range of services that local governments provide for their citizens moving forward. I think another positive thing that is going on is statewide we're beginning to pay attention to the need for this. I think people can have very different views on how we're moving forward as a state in the area of our local government management efforts. Obviously, there's been budget constraints. Local governments have taken hits of significant proportion in the support they get from the states. At the same time, we're seeing seeds being planted to encourage collaboration. One may have differing views as to whether the strategy is appropriate or not, but there's no question that at a state level we're beginning to pay attention to how we move local governments forward effectively, and I think that dialogue in and of itself is a positive thing. And then I think the last thing I would point out that is really good that's going on, again from 50,000 miles or however far up we are. Stratosphere, pick your analogy if you will, is that people are beginning to talk with one another. One of the things that is critical for progress is the development of networks, is the development of processes by which information can be shared so that people can replicate what works and avoid the pitfalls of what doesn't work. I think the Fund for Our Economic Future has tried to seed this kind of thing in whatever ways it possibly can. I think you all, as I looked through the audiences and walked in this morning, I saw many people who've been seeding this in various ways, at least for a couple of years that I've been involved with it. So that's a fourth positive thing that is happening that I think can help us move forward. I think there are also a couple of challenges we need to be cognizant of. One is collaboration isn't easy. There are lots of collaborative efforts, if we pay attention, that start and fail, start and sputter, start and move slowly. That's because many of these things take a fair amount of work to do right. If you're going to provide public services in any one of a number of different areas, there's lots of cogs and pieces, lots of human beings, lots of pieces of the puzzle that have to be aligned. And not everything is a low-hanging fruit in this area. I think there probably are some things that are easier than others, but it does take work and it doesn't happen automatically. I think Brad Whitehead's comments out front recognize this fact. And that's a challenge. That means we need to learn from each other. That means we need to make an effort to understand what works. And I think recognizing that complexity and understanding it is a challenge. I think the sixth thing, and it's a related challenge, and that is that we're not well organized right now to derive lessons and transfer them. We don't have an ongoing capacity as a region or even as a state to understand what's working with regard to government collaboration and to transfer those lessons in a systematic, ongoing, consistent fashion throughout our state and throughout our region. And so as we think about this network moving forward and some of the things that needs to be done, I would suggest two challenges we need to take on is understanding the complexity, trying to find what's easy, and then building an ongoing capacity as a region and as a state to do that effectively over time. So that's my take.
John, thank you very much for that. Given where you ended, I'm going to Ed next, because I think that Ed's job, and correct me if I'm wrong, Ed, your job is to really address those two challenges.
Mm-hmm. Okay, just by way of background, I'm Ed Jerse. I'm the Director of Regional Collaboration for Cuyahoga County. I served for 9 years in the state legislature, and then most recently I was Director of Government Relations for the Department of Development under Governor Ted Strickland. After the last gubernatorial election, I was invited to look for a new line of work, and I was asked by Ed Fitzgerald, the new county executive, who was forming a new government in Cuyahoga County, to become the Director of Regional Collaboration. And when I went in for my interview with him, he said, well, what do you think we should do? And I started talking about getting people together to talk about where they might want to collaborate. And he said, we talk about regionalism all the time, and I'm tired of things that don't get anywhere. And that's what's so exciting about this conference today, because I think what we emphasized at the Efficient Government Now Network, as we talked about what could we do to advance this, is to find practical examples of things that work, because everybody can talk at the broadest level about, yeah, we want to cooperate, but how do you get communities to actually do things? I went around and talked to, we've got 59 different communities. I mean, talk about inefficiency. In Cuyahoga County, there's 59 different communities But I went out and talked to most of the mayors of those communities and asked them how were they doing and what challenges were they facing. And they talked about the fact that the local government fund is getting cut, the estate tax is getting cut, the recession has cut into everybody's revenues. One mayor, the mayor of Independence, said, we cannot do business the way we've done it anymore. It's just not practical. But he said, we don't know what to do. We don't know how to do the collaborations. So I think that the focus needs to be identifying things that have worked, whether it's something as simple as sharing an animal warden or as complicated as merging cities like Mayor Mulcahy from Orange is trying to do, and the whole spectrum in between. But how do you get from the concept stage to the operational stage? And there are savings to be found, and you see that with some of these communities that are sharing services or bulk purchasing and doing things like that. But it's difficult. And this is a lot like evolution. As John said, there are going to be dead ends. People are going to go down paths that they think will be profitable and will end up not being so. But there are tremendous opportunities, I believe, for savings and things like IT, cloud computing, and the potential there. I think we need to explore these things. We need to develop a playbook that shows you, mayors and service directors and fire chiefs, if you want to have a joint fire district, what are the processes that you need to go through? How do you analyze it? How do you determine whether there's savings or not? Those are all enormous challenges that we need to address. And this isn't always cheap. I mean, the fire district, that effort that is going on in the West Shore communities, their study alone cost $150,000. So you have to ask yourself, where do we come up with that money? Now, the state has set aside $45 million for innovative projects in the state budget. So that's something that you'll look to tap into. We're trying to be supportive of the efforts in our communities. But we need to start looking at these things, recognizing that they are difficult and they are a challenge. Some people talk about existing collaborations, and some of those are driving efficiencies. Others, though, for example, I know that a lot of you have mutual aid agreements, which are great, but are there real efficiencies there when you send your hook and ladder truck, and they send their hook and ladder truck, and they send their hook and ladder truck, and they send their hook and ladder truck to the same fire? I mean, do we really need 4 hook and ladder trucks going to one fire, or can we consolidate and maybe have 2 or 3 and have actual savings there? So we need to look to what are practical savings that we can have. The last thing I will say, in terms of the challenge, one of the challenges here is to change thinking, because one of the biggest lessons I had in the state legislature is that it is so easy to kill an idea. You can have the best idea in the world, and you can get 60 or 70 of the 99 state legislators in favor of it, and one guy gets up and makes a fiery speech about how this is going to hurt the community, it's going to make grandma less safe, it's going to raise your taxes, and people scatter away from the idea. It takes a lot of courage to say we're going to actually move something forward. And it also takes a lot of a sense that maybe sometimes we have to be the followers, not necessarily the leader, because anybody, when you have 59 communities and you try to get them to agree on things, it's very, very difficult, because everybody says, well, I have home rule, I have my own opinions, and they can kill those ideas very quickly. So you have to kind of be a little bit open to cooperating with your neighbors, be a little bit opening to recognizing that sometimes you may not get everything you want in the interest of advancing an idea that may lead to efficiencies and savings for your taxpayers.
I would add to that, or ask you perhaps, is it then important to communicate to your constituents that you're doing that you're not being, you're not like standing down, but you're actually doing what people have asked you to do, which is to collaborate and cooperate and get along.
And that's a huge challenge to the elected officials, because the mayor who says, I want to merge my community, or I want to merge my fire district, somebody's going to get up at the council meeting and saying, you're taking the identity of my community away. You're going to make the response time weaker. I mean, and there may be instances that it may be, the reality may be that you're actually going to make the response times a lot better, that you may save money for the community, that you may not lay off any of the firefighters. But the person who gets up and says you're going to do all those things gets everybody worried and everybody thinking, and it takes tremendous leadership to overcome that kind of negativity. So that's a challenge for all the elected officials.
And before we move on to Dave Kaminski, I just want to provide a little context for your comments. Should people here, regardless of whether they work inside Cuyahoga County or not, think of you as a resource for this kind of work when it comes to navigating all of this this unfamiliar territory?
I'm hoping to be a resource in the sense of cooperating with Brad and his staff in developing. There's a lot of regional efforts going on. There's a Sustainable Communities Initiative, there's the Regional Prosperity Initiative, and Efficient Government Now Network, and we participate in all of those and try to be a resource. And I'm happy to answer questions that people may have. But one of the reasons I want to participate most in this particular initiative is that it is a practical initiative. It is a how do you do this? We can talk about long-term planning, and that's all important, but these folks out here need to know how you get from point A to point B, and that's what this group is trying to do.
Okay. Dave Kaminski, from both the Stark County perspective and the private sector perspective, what are you seeing? And in particular, I mean, I think this conversation is moving towards what's actually working and where are the opportunities. And you and I spoke on the phone earlier, and you said, you know, honestly, I don't have a whole lot of success stories to share, which I'm just, you know, letting you all know that beforehand. But go ahead.
Well, we're looking for opportunities to participate in any way we can in bringing people to talk about collaboration. For instance, we helped to lead a health department study in Stark County that analyzed the strengths and weaknesses of the city and the county health departments, believing that discussion would lead to some talk about collaboration down in the future. We participated in every discussion that has taken place in regards to merging city and county building departments. I think the business community looks for opportunities to encourage government to look for savings and efficiency. We believe that creative and efficient government is good for economic development, and certainly the absence of those two things could be bad for economic development and business growth. You were kidding me. You were kidding about my few years in the private sector. Now that I've joined the chamber staff, actually, the newspaper is a private sector business. It's an interesting business because you tend to be more an observer of both the public and the private sector than most other places. And I think I have a fairly good idea of the differences between the public and the private sector. I think the private sector, the business community, wants government to be efficient and spend as little money as possible and regulate as little as possible and create a good business environment. But they certainly don't have all the answers. And if they had all the answers, no business would ever go broke or go out of business. And what I think they have to always appreciate, and I try to remind them, is that the government does certain things because they have no choice but to do it. I work a lot with schools, and I tell the business people, you know, that the school doesn't have the option of laying off the third grade because it's not a productive business unit. It's kind of a silly example, but it illustrates what I think I'm talking about, and that is, as Brad said, CEOs can hand down orders and things can happen in a much more quick and efficient way in the private sector than in the public sector. But I think that there are ways in which the private sector can contribute to your work, and we try to do that at every opportunity we can in our community. For instance,
yeah, I was going to say, what specifically?
For instance, if you have an IT broadband project or issue, we have people in industry with a lot of experience in that area, and we can lend expertise to that discussion. Not to say we would tell government how it needs to make its decisions, but we've got experience in that. HR, group purchasing, a lot of the challenges that you face, we have subject experts that could contribute to your broader knowledge of how these problems can be solved, and we're always ready to do that. I participate in the Efficient Government Network because I hope to provide a kind of business perspective to the discussions, understanding clearly that the people who are driving the network are people like you, the people in government who really see opportunity and see need to do this work. And then I go back home and I look for every opportunity I can to tell government that the business community is interested in this work and will encourage you in every way we can to help you do it. I think the incentive for this work will only get greater as, you know, right now local government people see the cuts in local government funding from the state as kind of an intellectual problem, but next year it's going to be a real problem, and tighter budgets are going to be a real problem. And I think the incentive to do the work that many of you are doing are only going to increase, and we look for the chance to encourage that and offer our expertise in helping you get there, knowing, or at least trying to remind ourselves at every turn, that we are not you. The private sector is different from the public sector. We have to understand the differences, but look for the common ground in which we can help each other.
I think I speak for a lot of people when I say it's very refreshing to hear you say that, as a member of the private sector, that it is substantially different from the public sector. We are a little more than halfway through this conversation. I have a bunch of questions that I can throw at these guys to fill the time, but your questions are more important than mine. So if you have any, there are a couple of microphones towards the front. Please come on up, and as soon as I see people there, I'll stop asking questions and let you ask them. But right now, I wonder if we could just go down the panel here. And we laid out this challenge of figuring out what works. And we have some experience in this already. So what works? What are the conditions for successful collaboration? Or what's an example of a place where collaboration is easiest? I say easiest meaning relatively easy. None of this, as we've said, is easy, but let's focus on what we can do, where the lowest hanging fruit might be. John, you want to start?
Yeah, I'm trying to figure out how to address the question you've asked, Dan. I think there's multiple ways to do it. I think because I'm the person from the university here on the panel, I'll do it from a kind of an academic perspective, knowing that the practitioner perspectives are well represented here.
What does the peer-reviewed research tell you about what works?
Well, I wasn't going to get into kind of a full research review, but I will say that we did do a series of case studies and are involved in finishing those up now. And we went through a process where we looked at whether particular collaborations were moving forward. Some, as I mentioned earlier, some collaborations get started, move forward, and end up producing positive results. Others sputter, yield talk, and may get nowhere. How do we predict one versus another? When we aligned the case studies we looked at here in Northeast Ohio and sent them through a systematic evaluation according to a series of variables that were thought to be important in the academic literature, two variables emerged as driving progress in collaboration. One is some kind of top-down incentive or effort from a granting authority, from a mandating authority at a higher level of government that in essence puts pressure on the collaboration to move forward. And
so the Efficient Gov Now contest or the Local Government Innovation Fund?
Those would be examples of, I mean, you get a grant from EGN or you get a grant from the Local Government Innovation Fund, you've got a proposal that you submitted to get that grant, you've got timetables to meet, there's some top-down pressure to move forward, you've got to justify what you're doing. And in other cases, it's simply a mandate. You know, the federal government comes in, the state government comes in, says you have to do this, and there's a legal force of law behind that. And that is a top-down piece of pressure that when it is applied in combination with a group of organizations that have worked together effectively in the past, amongst the case studies we studied, every single one of those cases where those two conditions existed continued to move forward. Others fell by the wayside. That is a small sample. It's a cross-case comparative analysis, but if you ask if you ask the professor in a sense, what are the conditions for success here, I'm going to suggest that those two look like pretty good candidates. So, top-down pressure, and then what you all are doing now, building relationships that work. And if you have relationships that work, then you can have the will, the challenge, and to the extent you can possibly move forward, you got to build the know-how out of those relationships. So that would be, I guess, my stab at it.
If those would be conditions, what about places where we can be looking, fire dispatch or IT or wherever? Dave Kaminski.
I tell people, when I talk about collaborative government, I tell people that the best collaborators I know are the public school districts. And this effort does not tend to move itself toward public education as opposed to civil government. But some of the best collaboration in Stark County is being done at the public school level. The public school, the Education Service Center in the county has formed a council of governments, and it brokers an insurance package for 17 to 25 educational units and bargains a great insurance package for 14,000 people at a time. They do collective purchasing in everything from gas and diesel fuel to paper and trash disposal. These are all things that have been going on for a while because the public school people in Stark County really get it when it comes to this, and they also tend to cooperate better than school superintendents don't run for election, mayors do, and I think that school superintendents tend to be able to collaborate and cooperate better because of that. You would think 911 would be easy. I see a lot of firemen in the audience, and I believe that Joint Fire Service and 911 is hot on everybody's list. We campaigned in the Efficient Gov Now contest to win a grant for our 911 project, and it's moving along, but it has political barriers to overcome, and our 911 director, Joe Concata, will talk about that in a panel later today. If you're looking, I'll go back to that. If you're looking for models of efficiency within public service, don't hesitate, don't neglect to look at what your public schools are doing. At least in Stark County, they're the collaboration leaders, hands down.
Do you find that the municipalities are noticing that and saying, hey, we can learn something?
I don't know that they are. Every time I have a chance to talk about it, I tell them that they should. Yeah. And again, it's there are differences between how the schools operate and how townships and cities operate that may not be as profound as the differences between how government operates and business operates, but there are differences, and that may provide barriers you have to overcome. But they're terrific collaborators from where I come from.
Tom?
Yeah, I guess I would say two things. One is trust. You really have to trust the community that you're dealing with, and that's a relational thing. I can recall I was doing some consulting about 4 or 5 years ago in a community west of Cuyahoga County. I won't disclose what, but I was talking to an elected official there who was very upset with the neighboring community, and it really revolved around something that someone in the neighboring community had said about his wife, and she had subsequently passed away. And I thought, oh my God, I expressed my regret at the passing, and he said, well, she passed away in 1965. And I mean, it was still sad, and I'm sure he was still mourning her, but you have to move on. You can't, 40 years later, be saying, that SOB next door, I'll never do anything with him. And the only way to trust people is to get to know them and figure out, gee, they're a real person, and they've got the same kind of problems I do, paying the mortgage every month and buying gasoline, and we're not that unalike. And so I think building that bond of trust, that it's hard to do, to say, okay, I'm going to take something that's an essential service, and I trust that my neighbor's going to perform it at my level or better. The other thing that I would point out is I think we need to redefine what we call collaboration. My mindset as I got involved in some of these efforts was collaboration meant that we worked with entities that look like us. I began to say, gee, we ought to be working with other cities. We should be working with the county. We should be working with the townships. And in the last year, I've begun to redefine in my own mind who it is that we should be collaborating with. For example, historically, we sit out my office 5 miles to the northeast is Kent State, 5 miles out of my office to the southwest is Akron U. And we have collaborated, or we haven't collaborated, worked with them in the past, but it's always been sort of, could John Hoornbeek and his group come in and look at something, or provide an intern who could look at something. But we're actually now conducting discussions with both universities about how we could actually collaborate. We're not looking at them to do studies. We're looking at them to partner with us in terms of various functional areas, that they would become, in fact, an extension of the city of Talmadge, which would provide tremendous capabilities to the areas that we're looking at. And so what's happening, at least in Talmadge, is we're beginning to say, gee, you don't have to look like us for us to be able to develop collaborative relationships. We think there's an enormous potential to work with Akron University and Kent State in something other than, can you send us an intern? But can you really meaningfully collaborate? And the response from both institutions has been overwhelmingly positive, which I think is great. So I think we have to rethink, well, who can we collaborate with?
That's very good news. Ed Jerse, and then we'll get to a question from the audience.
Very briefly, let me give you a macro example of what works and a micro example of what works. On the West Shore, there are 7 communities that have established a council of governments to plan a joint fire district. And that's moving along. It's a very difficult lift, but it's moving along. But what's important is that collaboration and that council of governments gives them an opportunity not only to talk about fire districts, but also to talk about other areas that might be shared. So I would encourage you to develop clusters of communities that neighbor you, that you might have opportunities to share services. And every so often, bring your fire chiefs and your police chiefs and your service directors and your economic development directors together and have those conversations, because those relationships and those gatherings can be very important in identifying opportunities. When I went around to talk to the mayors of Cuyahoga County, I started with the bigger cities, and I'd often go to large cities. The mayor would be a former businessman or a CPA, and they would give me their take on things. And then as I got through the list, I went to a very small community of about 1,200 people. I hadn't met the mayor before. I said, what's your background? He said, well, I was just on council, and the mayor left for another office, so I became the mayor. I worked in a machine shop all my life, and I'm thinking, okay, he doesn't have the skills to put this together. I said, well, what have you been doing? And he said, well, I came in with a $1.8 million deficit, and in the past 12 months, I've eliminated that by joining with the neighboring community to have a single clerk of courts. We've got a single building director, or a building inspector, because we didn't really have one that was busy the whole day long, so we were able to combine those services. I added some part-time people so we could reduce the overtime that we had on staff. And in just 12 months, he had eliminated a $1.8 million deficit. And I thought, this is a guy who unexpectedly, in his little small way, was finding opportunities to find efficiencies by combining with neighboring communities to do things. I think that those kinds of things are critical. And the last point I'll make is one of the things, you may have heard, we're trying to get the communities of Cuyahoga County to sign an anti-poaching agreement. And one of the things that John Hoornbeek had told me early on is that one of the indicators of success in collaboration is having a habit of collaborating. Having done it before with somebody makes you comfortable with the idea that you can share a service. So if you're risk averse, find something small, an animal warden, a building inspector, something like that you might have an opportunity to share, so that you get comfortable with the concept, you get comfortable with the partner, and you have that experience. That's what we're trying to do with the anti-poaching agreement, is to find something that everybody can kind of agree to, so that we don't look at each other suspiciously, that we don't act as if we're all in silos, but that we see opportunities for sharing services and cooperating with our neighbors.
Thank you very much. Chris Thompson.
Dan, I'll try to get the audience
Is the mic on?
engaged here with one question for Ed. We've heard a lot from the state. I think the state basically has driven a lot of people into this room by cutting the local government fund, driven a lot of folks to collaborate. But there's constant talk among the local officials that they don't have the tools from the state to collaborate, either legislatively or long-standing practice makes it very hard to make this happen. Right. In fact, I was told earlier today that they're having a hard time finding legislators to sponsor legislation that will make it easier for communities to work together. What would it take for this room to influence that room down in Columbus?
Well, I don't want to put him on the spot, but I see that Randy Cole from the state has just walked in, and I think we're going to be hearing from him lately. And he actually came to one of the earlier Efficient Government Now network meetings, and I was encouraged by his, because I think he's worked with former auditor Mary Taylor, who is now the lieutenant governor, and trying to find ways that we can work and that the state can contribute to collaborative projects. I know that they have the $45 million innovation fund, and he may be able to elaborate on how that will evolve to assist communities in funding these things. The other comment that was made about educational service centers, I think the state is exploring ways that they can expand the educational service centers, which promote collaboration, shared services, bulk purchasing among the school districts. I think the state is now looking at maybe expanding their role so that they can participate with municipalities as well as school districts. And I think that's a tremendous opportunity to leverage the buying power and the service sharing potential of not only the school districts but the communities. So I think there's some exciting opportunities out there, and I hope that we'll hear more about those later on today.
But Ed, I think behind Chris's question was, to what extent is there a challenge to educate legislators about the need for this, your former colleagues in the State House?
Well, the other thing I learned in the legislature is that the power of a mayor or actually even citizens calling up and talking to legislators is huge. You have to understand that state legislators they live in fear of a bad editorial. They live in fear of a news story that says they're not doing their job. If you get one letter from a constituent, you may discard it. If you get 10 letters, it's a crisis. So you have an opportunity.
But that's all it takes, 10 letters.
Believe me, it does. I was trying to advance a bill and to help children who had been injured in daycares and try to make daycares safer. And there was a network of parents. It's an amazing problem, but that network of parents was throughout the state. And so we asked them to contact their local legislature. And I was in the minority, and I had majority Republicans coming up to me on the floor saying, I want to be on your bill because I heard from this family. I want to be on your bill because they lost their child or their child was injured in a daycare. So they do listen to that stuff. And that bill eventually passed, even though I was in the minority. It passed both houses and was signed by the governor because average people were contacting their legislators. So you have tremendous power to influence them.
So everyone here, if everybody winds up agreeing on something, then everybody can send an email to Speaker Batchelder or something like that, and boom, get it done.
Well, start with your own legislator, because he'll talk to Speaker Batchelder, and when they start getting a lot of contacts like that, they'll act.
Okay. Any other questions out here? I'm going to call on people. Go ahead. The mic's right behind you.
In Talmadge, it sounded like when you combine dispatch services with Stowe, you realized a significant amount of savings. But you also mentioned that the employees who were doing the dispatching for you were still on board, and they went to that new district, if you will. You had to buy new equipment. And so I was thinking to myself, where were the savings? And if you could be more specific about that aspect of it.
Well, there were a couple things. Realizing that we were going to move towards Stowe, we had an intense transition period in that we had some dispatchers who weren't excited about the move, and I didn't know, but dispatching is actually a very good area in which to find employment opportunities, or at least it was. And so they left our employment. We thought to ourselves, this is kind of crazy to replace them because we don't need the combination of the two Stowe dispatchers and Tellme's dispatchers, the sum of the total. So we had a transition period where we did not replace them. We incurred significant overtime during that time period. And so so Stowe was able to absorb the individuals that did transfer. The other big savings was we were looking at an equipment purchase that we thought was going to cost us $1.4 million, $1.5 million, which we did not have to incur, and it was going to cost, I assume, I haven't asked Stowe, but I assume it was going to cost, they were looking at the same kind of cost we were looking at. Well, they didn't have to spend $1.5 million, and we didn't have to spend $1.5 million in Mogadore. We could combine those capital expenditures. Kind of going back to what Ed said, does everyone need a ladder truck? you know. And so we were able to say, gee, this equipment has more than enough capacity to serve just Talmadge or just Stowe or just Mogadore or what have you. And so there were substantial savings there as well. But the transitions are difficult. And when you throw unions on top of it, it becomes even more difficult. Our fire department, for example, ran an ad in the local paper protesting the movement. Some of the unions wrote letters to our mayor protesting it. Some of our unions sent letters to the Stowe mayor protesting it. So this wasn't this seamless, easy transition. It was really hard. And it took a lot of time and a lot of effort. I think the good part was there was a commitment in Talmadge that we were going to do it. This was going to happen in one form or another form. And so every time you seemed to run into the wall, you turned around and kept going. You just said, we're going to have to modify how we do it, but we're going to get this done. The cost savings were too great.
As a way of, we're almost at the end of this, and as a way of wrapping up, this last question kind of focused us in on the hard savings, the real numbers that were savings. But my suspicion is that in all of this, there are soft savings, soft value that is hard to quantify. But the fact that now in Stowe, Talmadge, and Mogadore, there are people who know what's going on in every community and are relating to the neighbors in that way, that seems to me to be of value in a way that, John, would be hard to quantify in a report, but anecdotally would seem to provide a benefit to all of the participating communities. And I wonder if I could ask the four of you to talk just briefly about those kinds of things and why, the other reasons, besides the specific savings, which are vital, but the other reasons why this is important. Dave Kaminski, you want to start?
No.
Let's let Ed start.
I think the measure on all of the things when I talk to mayors is that you either want to deliver the same services that you currently deliver for less money or deliver better services for the same amount of money. And you have to look at the opportunities. For example, in a joint fire district, people are worried that they're not going to get the same response time, but sometimes the fire people will tell you that you actually may have a faster response time because a fire truck may be coming back from a run and be ideally situated, even better situated maybe than the home community to reach an accident or a fire. And so those are the kind of things that you look for, things that are out there that are not necessarily readily apparent at first blush.
Now, Dave.
I'll tell you something I'm looking for and I'm not seeing, and it may be slightly off the point, but let me make it anyway. There are municipal elections throughout Ohio this fall, and there certainly are throughout Stark County. And all of you in the room realize the budget and performance pressure that local government is going to be under. And I do not understand why there is not a mayor in Stark County running for office saying, I am going to be the champion of collaboration in Stark County. I am going to show you that we will take risk in our city or our community to work with you, and I'm going to take the political credit for being the champion of collaboration. I don't understand why there's nobody running for office taking this risk, because I think the risk is small and I think the benefit is great. It's a mystery to me.
John Hoornbeek, I know you can't count it, but talk about it.
The question, I guess, is what are the benefits of collaboration outside of the potential for cost savings? And I guess I would comment that as I've looked at collaborative endeavors and have talked with colleagues who've done that, I would say almost all the time, I won't say every case, but nearly every case of collaboration has a service component to it as well as a cost-saving component. And while in this day and age we are focused on the financial challenges that exist in public sector entities throughout our region, we also have a larger challenge over time to construct public sector efforts that match the problems we face. And I think collaboration, in a sense, often unadvertised, but is probably one of the key vehicles we can use to align our public services with our current problems. I'm going to put in a plug for the stormwater workshop that's going to follow this plenary. Bob Now, who I saw a moment ago, I'm not sure where he is going to be speaking about a project that he's got underway in Stark County. There was a mandate that urban areas map their storm sewers. And Bob and Sean Phillips, people on his staff and others in Stark County, focused an effort and a proposal to join 7 communities in that effort to jointly map, create one map, not 7 different disjointed maps of their storm sewers. And they're moving forward in that. They're saving some money. I haven't quantified it, but I'm going to bet you over the long run, 10, 20 years, by far the biggest benefit of that project is going to be the fact that you know where your storm sewers are throughout a large region and can manage emergencies more effectively because you got one place to go. And that isn't a cost savings. You can't put that on the bottom line. It will result in cost savings, I suppose, if you had an economist you hired in 2030 to look back 20 years. And I think you'd see numbers that would dwarf what we can articulate now. And so I think as you look at collaborations, it's a mistake to focus only on the costs. It's important, it's convenient, but it isn't, at the end of the day, the only value to linking up institutions to provide services. We got different problems now than when those institutions were created. And when we link institutions in ways that match problems, we provide better services.
Fantastic. Thank you, John. We are about to wrap up. Before we do, one of the things that we hope all of you will be thinking about continually today is, what can I be doing and how can I get there? What can I be doing with my neighbor and how can I get there? And as you're articulating that to yourself, I want to invite all of you to just stop by the folks with the camera in the back at the Civic Commons, by the Civic Commons banner there, and talk to the Civic Commons team about those very issues, that very thing. We'll record it, and it'll become a part of this ongoing conversation. And then if you don't do what you said you're going to do, you'll get in... No, you won't. At any rate, let me thank Ed Jerse, Tom Pascarella, Dave Kaminski, and John Hoornbeek.
Thank you.
Thank you all very much. And now Bethia Burke will tell us what's happening next.
Hi, I'm Bethia Burke. I'm with the fund, and if you guys ever email that efficientgovnetwork.org email, it's me it goes to, just so you know. Today... Oh, good. Okay. So some of you might be wondering what's next on the agenda. You know that there are many breakout sessions that we have today. Up here is what's going on this morning. We just had the panel. We're going to break out to concurrent working sessions. The 4 that are listed up there are the 4 that are in the morning. There are an additional 4 in the afternoon. We will have about a 15-minute break before those start, so plan to be in your rooms at about 10:30. To get to the breakout rooms, you just go out of this room, down the escalator, and look to your right. They're each labeled. They shouldn't be hard to find, but if you have any questions, don't hesitate to ask. We'll have a break after those sessions and come back to this room for lunch. So we'll see you back here at about 12:30. But before we break, I just want to thank these 4 members of the Efficient Gov Network, as well as we have many others who have worked to pull this conference together. This conference in itself was a collaborative effort. We had a lot of people working on all of the different sessions and pulling together all of the materials you will see today. They each selected to highlight the specific collaborations that you'll hear about. So we hope that you find them both interesting and enjoyable. I do also want to remind you that if you didn't get your parking validated, you can get it validated at the registration desk. If you forgot your ticket in your car, just bring it back in, bring it to the registration desk at any point during the day. At the registration desk, you can also register to be a member of the Efficient Gov Network, or you can do that online. And we do want to remind you, I'm sorry, I don't know where I'm pointing this to make it, okay. That's the afternoon sessions. I do want to remind you that there are 2 ways to continue to engage after today. We'll remind you about this again at lunch. You are welcome to join us at the next Efficient Gov Network meeting, which will be on November 10th in Richfield. You can also go to the civiccommons.com/EGN to continue conversations. We have Jill Miller-Zyman from the Civic Commons has been doing a great job of collecting content to put on that website and to engage others in conversation. So we encourage you to do both of those things. But for now, you have 15 minutes, and we'll see you in your individual sessions at 10:30.